The committee will come to order. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Monetary Policy and Trade Subcommittee hearing on the production and circulation of coins and currency. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. And, we'd all like to have more coins and currency, and we probably generally take it for granted, but it doesn't happen by itself. And the purpose of this hearing is to, which is something I think this subcommittee should be doing periodically, is just to examine our physical coins and physical currency that we have, and whether there is anything we should be looking at to change or do differently relative to said currency. Because confidence in the security of our money is one of the strengths of this country. And we've had the benefit of a fairly stable exchange rate and interest-free loans on more than $1 trillion of money in circulation, but a good half of the physical currency in the form of $100 bills stays overseas. But it's good to think about this. There's a lot of discussion, and I'm sure this will be a topic that a penny, I'm trying to think if I have one in my pocket right now. I actually don't. Oh, the ranking member has a penny. There we are. Oh, look at that. He's got a bunch of pennies. One of the things we'll be discussing is that this penny actually costs more than a penny to make. And some of our friends in Canada and in the United Kingdom have changed the makeup of their coins in order that they don't cost more than the nominal value of the coin to make. So that's one of the things we will be discussing today. But we also we'll be looking at paper currency as well, as to the security of said paper currency, the volume of it that's been made, and we need to also realize that in today's world, a lot of currency is digital, and I don't mean Bitcoins at this time. We'll leave Bitcoins and Dogecoins and Litecoins and all the rest of them for another hearing, but I simply mean using the kind of currency that instead of looking like this, looks something like this and shows up on your phone or in your credit card rather than with physical currency. So this hearing will be to analyze these things, look at these things, hear from our distinguished panel of witnesses. Let me just briefly say who they are. We have Larry Felix, Director of the Bureau of Engraving and Printing with the Department of the Treasury. We have Mr. Richard Peterson, who is the Deputy Director of the United States Mint in the Department of the Treasury. We have Lorelei St. James, who is Senior Executive and Director of Physical Infrastructure Issues at the Government Accountability Office, or GAO. And we have Andrew Mills, who is the Director of Circulating Coins at the Royal Mint in the United Kingdom. So we have a panel of experts that we will be hearing from relative to coins and currency, and we look forward to your testimony. And with that, I will yield the balance of my time and yield to the gentleman from Missouri, the ranking member, Mr. Clay, for 5 minutes.
And thank you, Chairman Campbell, for holding this hearing regarding the production and circulation of coins and currency. The Federal Reserve Cash Product Office is charged with supplying adequate amounts of coin and currency. The CPO acts through the district Federal Reserve banks to distribute and store coins and currency. Last fall, the GAO found that the Fed's manages coin and currency inventory that are aimed to ensure adequacy of supply. GAO suggested a number of methods that the Feds could take to improve its management, and I look forward to hearing from GAO regarding this issue. Also, with the growth, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, in increasing diversity of payment methods such as debit cards and online payments, I would like to know what is the future for coins and paper money, and are we moving to a totally plastic payment system? Since the mid-2000s, the per-unit cost of production and distribution of the penny and the nickel has exceeded each of the coins per unit face value. And in the U.S. Mint's most recent annual report for FY 2013, The cost of production and distribution of the penny was 1.8 cents, and the cost of the nickel production was 9.4 cents. The U.S. Mint lost $55 million on minting and issuing the penny, and $40.5 million on the nickel. And I'd like to know what is the cost of production and distribution of the remaining coins, such as the 50-cent coin. Currently, Representative Stivers has introduced
app for the blind and visually impaired using, so it's free to anyone who wants to download. The BEP anticipates that it will also start working and selecting a tactile feature by January of 2015, and that's a priority for this organization. The ACD has indicated that the next note to be redesigned will be the $10 note, and it should have the new tactile feature and the enhanced security features. The $10 note was selected because it's a transactional note, and it's also a low-volume note in terms of production, so we'll be able to test and determine how the tactile feature works in circulation. However, if there's a threat to another denomination, we will change that. But as it stands right now, the next note will be a 10 redesign.
If you could wrap up your testimony, Mr. Felix, time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks about initiatives of BEP. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thanks. I'm sure you'll be getting some questions. Mr. Peterson was named Deputy Director of the United States Mint on January 25th, 2011, and before becoming its top executive, he served as the Mint's Associate Director of Manufacturing for 2 years. Thank you so much for being here. Did you bring any samples? Please, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Chairman Campbell, Ranking Member Clay, members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you again today to discuss the United States Mint and coin production. The United States Mint is a vibrant team of 1,700 dedicated men and women. We operate 2 fiscally separate programs, a circulating coin program and a numismatic program that includes collectible coins and our precious metal bullion coins. I last testified before you in November of 2012, and I committed then that the Mint would continue to drive costs out of our manufacturing operations. I'm pleased to report our results for fiscal 13. We shipped 10.7 billion coins to the Federal Reserve, an increase of nearly 18% from the 9.1 billion shipped in 2012. The general and administrative costs of our circulating coin operations decreased another $4.7 million, that's 7.6%, to $56.9 million. Since 2009, we have reduced the G&A costs of our circulating program by over 42%. Now, that's real money. That's $41 million of annual G&A expenses that have been eliminated. In short, our costs are down and our production is up. These productivity improvements resulted in a $350 million transfer of seigniorage to the Treasury General Fund. In December of 2012, we provided our first report to Congress detailing the analysis and testing of possible alternative metals for our coinage. Since then, we have tested in much greater detail several promising alternatives. There are several key points to share at this time. First, the overarching mission of our circulating coin program is to facilitate commerce by minting and issuing circulating coins in quantities that the Secretary of the Treasury determines are necessary to meet the needs of the nation. As our 2013 results show, the Mint is meeting that mission with a denomination portfolio that generates positive seigniorage. Second, cash is and will remain an important method for settling financial transactions. In a 2011 survey, an economist for the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston concluded that 65% of all transactions under $10 and 45% of all transactions under $25 were completed with cash. Third, our report in 2012 concluded that no alternative metal compositions would lower the cost of the penny, and it is highly unlikely that the cost of minting a penny will ever again fall below 1 cent. Fourth, when other countries have made changes to their coinage and currency lineups, a key to the success of the effectiveness of the change was the communications plan that explained the change. And finally, fifth, changing the metallic composition of our coins will affect a variety of stakeholders in different ways. The Mint is actively seeking feedback from the vending, parking meter, coin-operated laundry, amusement, public transportation, banking, and supermarket industries. Our next report to Congress is due this December, and we are committed to providing decision makers with accurate and timely information. Our bullion program set a record for the number of ounces sold in 2013. Gold ounces were up 55% to 1.2 million ounces, and silver ounces were up 31% to 44.6 million ounces. Our American Eagle bullion coins remain the coin of choice for investors around the world. We are pleased that our suppliers have invested in capacity enhancements and that we are able to meet demand without restrictions or allocations. The Mint's commemorative coin program honors people, places, events, and institutions of significance in American history and culture. We have two important and high-profile commemorative coin programs in 2014, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Baseball Hall of Fame commemorative coin programs. The baseball program features curved coins, the first ever produced by the United States Mint. The Mint is actively engaged in regular outreach efforts and public awareness events for both programs that include members of Congress, including John Lewis and full committee ranking member Maxine Waters, as well as several Baseball Hall of Fame members. Mr. Chairman, the United States Mint is a cost-effective, open, transparent organization that is meeting its core mission to produce circulating precious metal bullion and numismatic coins. I thank you for your interest in our activities, and I'm pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. All right. Lorelei St. James is a senior executive in the U.S. GAO, serving as director in the GAO's physical infrastructure issue area. In this capacity, Ms. St. James has a wide-ranging portfolio covering issues such as the United States Postal Service, coin and currency, which is why you're here, VA construction, and maritime infrastructure issues. A little controversy in a few of those areas, but we're not going to talk about those today. We're only going to talk about coin and currency. Thank you so much for being here. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Campbell, Ranking Member Clay, and members of the subcommittee.
Please pull that microphone a little closer so we can hear you better.
How's this?
A little closer still.
How's that?
That's better. Thanks.
All right, gotcha. Chairman Campbell, Ranking Member Clay, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to be here today to discuss the Federal Reserve's management of the nation's coin inventory. At the end of fiscal year 2012, coins worth over $40 billion were in circulation, and in 2013, the U.S. Mint produced over 10 billion coins. My statement today is based on a report that we issued in October 2013. This report reviewed the Federal Reserve's management of the coin inventory and includes recommendations to improve how the inventory is managed. Within the Federal Reserve, the Cash Product Office, or CPO, manages the nation's coin inventory, distributes existing inventories of coins, and orders new coins from the U.S. Mint based on a forecasted demand. In 2009, CPO centralized coin management across the 12 reserve banks. Prior to this action, each reserve bank managed its own inventory, which sometimes resulted in either too many coins or not enough. This centralized system, in part, contributed to the 43% decrease in coin inventory levels from 2008 through 2012. Also in 2009, the CPO established national upper and lower inventory targets, which CPO uses to monitor inventory levels. For example, if inventory levels are above the upper target, CPO knows to order fewer coins, and if the levels are below the lower target, CPO may order more. From 2009 to 2012, we found in most cases that inventory targets were met. CPO also manages the inventory on a daily basis, determining when to order new coins or move coins from one location to another or both. If there is an insufficient supply of coins to meet demand in a given location and transferring coins from another location, known as an interbank transfer, would not be cost-effective, CPO orders new coins each month from the U.S. Mint based on a rolling forecast. In our review, we found that coined inventory costs totaled about $62 million in 2012, and that these costs had dramatically increased by 69% since 2008. We found CPO had not done a systematic review to determine why these costs had increased or if they could be reduced, and we recommended that the Federal Reserve direct the CPO to assess these costs. We also reviewed if CPO was following key inventory practices we identified for coin management. We found it was substantially following collaboration and risk management, but only partially following key practices in 3 other areas. For example, in examining its forecasting model, we found it was consistently under-ordering new coins when compared to actual demand, indicating that the forecast may be biased and that the model should be updated to reflect actual demand. In system optimization, we found CPO has multiple sources of information, but didn't use this information to optimize inventory management. We recommended that the Federal Reserve direct CPO to establish coin inventory goals and metrics and assess the accuracy of its forecasts. We also discussed potential changes in the demand for currency with Federal Reserve officials. According to them, studies we reviewed, and government banking officials in Austria, Australia, and Canada, any change in the demand for currency will likely be a gradual decline as electronic means of payments increase. For example, in the United States, the use of debit cards has increased more than any other payment type, about 7.7% per year from 2009 to 2012. In 2010, CPO began to develop a long-term strategic framework to be done in phases to consider potential changes in currency demand over the next 5 to 10 years. At the time of our review, CPO had not established a date that the third phase of this effort would be completed. In summary, we recommended that the Federal Reserve take additional actions to better manage the nation's coin inventory, and they agreed with our recommendations. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Andrew Mills is the Director of Circulating Coin at the Royal Mint, University of East Anglia in Cardiff in the United Kingdom, and you've been in that position since 2009. And did you bring 3 shillings and tuppence? Oh, you don't do that anymore. All right.
Since 1971.
Yes. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I would like to thank Chairman Campbell and the esteemed members of this committee for inviting the Royal Mint to give testimony on our work to control the cost of producing circulating coins. Current business-as-usual demand for UK circulating coin is approximately 1 billion pieces a year. We have a total capacity to make 4 billion pieces. The remaining capacity is used to supply struck coin and blanks to overseas central banks and mints around the world. We also supply tooling, metal recovery services and consultancy to these customers, which is why we describe ourselves as the world's leading export mint. Over the years, the Royal Mint has developed a number of capabilities that enable us to control the cost of producing circulating coin for our customers. Our armor plating technology replaces expensive solid alloy coins with a mild steel core electroplated with either nickel, brass or copper. This single layer, or monoplate of typically 25 microns, allows for a lifetime in circulation in excess of 20 years. In contrast, multi-layer plating has a thin outer layer of only 6 to 9 microns that can wear through in as little as 5 years in circulation, exposing the underlying copper layer. Our new award-winning ISIS technology, for the first time, brings a machine-readable high-security feature to our cost-effective armor-plated coins that up until now was only available in banknotes. ISIS coins can be read at over 4,000 coins a minute and provides a definitive binary authentication. It's either a genuine coin or it's a counterfeit, unlike today's electromagnetic sensing that has a wide acceptance window and varies over time. The high-security ISIS additive is co-deposited in the armor plating layer and is therefore constantly exposed to be read as the coins were in circulation. I'll now summarize the cost controls that we have implemented on behalf of Her Majesty's Treasury since decimalisation in 1971. To give a perspective of the scale of the cost savings, I have calculated the metal saving of each of these changes since they were made using London Metal Exchange prices on the 31st of March 2014. The current exchange rate is in the order of $1.65 to £1 sterling. There have been 4 types of programme that have controlled the cost of UK circulating coins. The first, demonetization. The decimal halfpenny ceased production in 1984, and in the last year of full issuance, 191 million were manufactured at a metal cost of £1.4 million. This cost then became non-recurring. Secondly, the conversion of solid alloy coins to armor-plated coins. In 1992, the 1 and 2p coins were converted from bronze to armor copper-plated steel. The metal cost saving since this change has been £281 million. To provide a sense of the scale difference between US demand and that of the United Kingdom, and comparing the US 1 cent with the UK 1 penny, since 1992 we have made 13 billion 1p coins, and the US Mint has made 190 billion 1 cent coins. In 2009, Her Majesty's Treasury announced that the 5 and 10p would be converted from copper and nickel to armor nickel-plated steel, and this change has saved £21 million in metal costs. Reduction in coin sizes has also occurred. In 1992, the copper and nickel 5 and 10p were reduced in size. These changes saved £135 million in metal costs, and in 1997, a smaller 50p was introduced, saving £29 million. Finally, the proactive replacement programme. The 2012 autumn statement announced the active withdrawal of the copper nickel 5 and 10p coins from circulation. In the first year of operation, it delivered £15 million of benefit to Her Majesty's Treasury and indeed the UK taxpayer. The UK coinage model also ensures that new coins are not struck when surplus coins are held by the cash industry members. Surplus and deficit cash industry members trade coins between one another on a weekly basis. Overall costs are also optimised by using an annual forecasting process agreed in the market between UK Payments, an industry body that represents retail banks and cash handling companies, the Royal Mint and Her Majesty's Treasury. For these changes to take place, I cannot emphasise enough how important stakeholder engagement is from early on in the process. We have regular dialogue with stakeholders that represent different facets of the coin acceptance industry, including vending, parking, amusements and retail. We also have close working relationships with major coin mechanism and sorting companies that provide equipment in the United Kingdom, and this is in addition to contact with institutions such as the Royal National Institute for the Blind. In closing, the Royal Mint has significant expertise and experience in this field, and ISIS provides a novel, high-security feature in lower-cost plated coins. We will be delighted to work with stakeholders here in the United States. Thank you once again for inviting me to give this testimony, and I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for your testimony. And now we will begin questions from this side for you. And I will recognize myself for 5 minutes for the first series of questions. And my first questions will be to you, Mr. Mills. You just described a lot of changes over a period of time, from eliminating a coin, the halfpenny, to changing the composition and even the size of various coins. And you mentioned stakeholders, vending, parking, et cetera. And all the savings to the Treasury, and certainly up here we're interested in saving money to our Treasury. But there is the question, what kind of disruption did this cause? How difficult was it for the private sector to accommodate all those various changes in coin type, composition, and size?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Our aim in any of these changes is to provide as little disruption as possible, be that for people within the industry or the general public. And I think a good measure is our most recent change, which was the introduction of the nickel-plated steel 5 and 10p coins. We engaged with stakeholders very thoroughly. A major stakeholder is the Automatic Vending Association in the United Kingdom, which represents much of the vending industry. And it was on their advice that indeed we took 2 years to introduce these new coins from the point of the announcement in September 2009 to their final introduction in January 2012.
Was that to give them time to change?
Absolutely. It was to absolutely minimize the impact on their members in terms of making sure that the software changes that were necessary could be carried out with incurring very little or no additional cost.
How do you and how does everyone deal if you have two different coins in circulation at the same time that are of completely different size or composition, but they have the same nominal value?
Yes, thank you. The change to the 5 and 10p, in fact, as far as the general public is concerned, they would really tell very little difference. They're the same diameter and look, for all intents and purposes, identical to one another, apart from the fact that one is magnetic because it's based on 96% steel, and the other one is non-ferrous, so it's non-magnetic. One of the big learnings from engaging with the vending industry is that they prefer co-circulation to occur for the shortest possible time. So the fewer coins their machines accept and have to recognize, the better that is for them and their members. And that's why we introduced the proactive replacement program to actively withdraw the copper nickel 5 and 10p's to the benefit of the vending industry.
All right, thank you. Mr. Peterson, Mr. Mills described a whole bunch of composition, which is way over my very limited chemical and metallurgy knowledge. Is there stuff they're doing in the UK that we're not, but we ought to be or should be thinking about?
Sir, could you repeat the last part of that question?
Is some of the composition things that Mr. Mills talked about in the UK, are we doing those things here, or should we, or have we decided not to, or?
Absolutely. The United States Mint began in 2011 an active research and development program to explore alternative metals for our coinage. And really, on the metallurgy piece, there are 4 metals on the periodic table of the elements that are in play. And it's zinc and iron in the form of steel, and then lead and aluminum. We're not going to make our coins out of lead, and aluminum is a very difficult metal to work with. So really, we're down to zinc and steel that are in play.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. St. James, when you look at the millennial generation, they use physical currency less than Mr. Clay and I do, and particularly coins. Is the Federal Reserve, are they anticipating, are they looking at all this sort of thing in terms of what impact that has on physical currency?
Turn this on. In their strategic plan that they have, that they started in 2010, they are looking at and trying to better monitor trends. And as I have in the written statement, with the countries that we talk to, Australia, to Austria and Canada, they believe that there'll be a gradual decline in currency, but there will still be what is called the unbanked. There'll still be a portion of the society who will always use coins. So one of the reasons why we made the recommendations to the Fed was for them to have more data to better monitor what was happening, and so they could see those changes in demand with more fidelity than they do right now.
Thank you. And I had questions for Mr. Felix, but I'll have to not get to them or get to them in the second round. I do have with me a $20 billion Zimbabwe note, which I always carry around to prove that it's really not about the paper. It's what stands behind the paper that's the most important. But with that, my time has expired, and I'll yield 5 minutes to the ranking member, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps I can borrow $10 billion from the 20.
I actually have, this is $20 billion. I have a $10 trillion note as well.
Mr. Felix, a white paper was issued by the BEP in 2013, reported that re-injured notes with tactile features designed to provide meaningful access to the blind and visually impaired won't be available for circulation for another 6 years. Can you talk about the process associated with designing and issuing the new notes and help us understand why it will take 6 years?
Thank you, sir. The reality is we design currency to deter counterfeiting, and so the longer lead time for our currency design is to get the overt and covert features in the currency as we introduce the new currency design. And as we introduce the new currency design, we also intend to apply the tactile feature, because the court had given us the opportunity to introduce it at the new design. So the longest lead time in that is not so much tactile features, but acquiring classified central bank features and being able to deploy them into the banknotes, as well as the security features that people can just look and determine whether or not it's authentic or not.
And now there is app. I'm sorry. There's an app that the blind can use that will tell you the denomination of the note.
Yes, there are several options. We have introduced a downloadable app on the Apple iPhone that you can use right now. In conjunction with the Department of Education, they've introduced one Apple Android, and of course we will also be distributing a portable currency reader for anyone who's eligible, and they can also get that through our collaboration with the Library of Congress.
Thank you for your response. Mr. Peterson, how viable is plated steel as an option for replacing the current composition of U.S. coinage?
Mr. Clay, as I mentioned, zinc and steel are currently in play, and we are analyzing several different compounds of steel, and we're doing a very detailed test regimen on this, where we've made millions of pieces of plated steel trial coins. We understand the striking pressure, the tonnage that we need to use on our presses, how long the dies will last. We take these coins and we tumble them in a tumbling chamber to simulate a lifetime of corrosion and wear. We add a little saline solution to simulate perspiration, so that we have a good feel as to the fact that these coins will be viable for the long term. And we know that our friends in Britain use plated steel, our friends in Canada use plated steel. Steel is a viable option.
Are you concerned that Canadian ownership of the plated steel patent would add additional costs to the production of plated steel coins?
I wish we would have gotten the patent first, but we didn't. And so in our price quotes with the Royal Canadian Mint, they are fair, and I'm not concerned that we're going to have an issue with that patent.
Thank you for that response. And Ms. St. James, what are the next steps the Federal Reserve should be taking to better manage coin inventory?
We were quite surprised when we looked at costs that between 2008 and 2012, the cost of the management of the coin inventory had increased by 69%. So we naturally asked them, why has it increased so much? And they said direct costs and support costs have gone up. But beyond knowing that that is what made up the 69%, they didn't really have specific answers for why those costs had increased, and they had not looked at them. So we recommended that they really do a good analysis of where they could reduce those costs.
Thank you for that response. And Mr. Mills, what steps has the Royal Mint taken to reduce coin production costs? Can you talk about that 20-year life span of the coin?
Yes, certainly. So there are several types of plating technology available for circulating coin, and the only one that has a license fee is the Canadian technology. So our armor technology is not only license-free, but we would say also has better duration in circulation. We apply a single layer of 25 microns in nickel-plated coins. Our independent testing, in fact, carried out here at the Fraunhofer Institute in the US, shows that on average coins wear at a micron a year. So 25 microns, you should get at least 25 years life. With the outer layer of multiple plating technology, you only get 6 to 9 microns. So it means you're going to be paying a license fee and potentially replacing your coins every 6 to 9 years.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Well, the gentleman's time has expired. Thank you. And now we'll recognize the chairman of the Committee on Agriculture, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would note to all my colleagues that the things you work with not only just represent a medium of exchange, a store of value, but as we've discussed before in this subcommittee, a very important statement about our society. In the case of paper money, the artistic nature, the scientific nature in the United States, 150 years. Coinage, of course, 2,500 years of recorded history documented in those things. So it's not just a subject matter of immediately what's in your pocket change, but it's a statement that will be left for millenniums to come. That said, for a moment, I'd like to visit with the panel about just a variety of small issues. Ms. St. James, in the examination of the circulating cash situation and the way the Federal Reserve handles that, I have read somewhere, and maybe you could confirm or deny this, but the 50-cent piece, literally, do we have more coming back into the banks than we have going out? Can either of Mr. Peters, could you touch on this for a moment about the nature of the 50-cent piece? Is it an example of a coin that, in effect, doesn't circulate at all anymore once you get past the numismatic community?
The 50-cent piece is not ordered by the Federal Reserve, so the United States Mint hasn't made 50-cent pieces in 4 or 5 years.
For general circulation, so that answers the question. Mr. Felix, what percentage of your currency printed that you deliver to the Federal Reserve, what percentage of that's $100 bills, approximately?
Well, so the order change,
and I know it varies from
right.
cycle to cycle, just
the
round
vast
numbers.
majority of notes in terms of value that circulate outside our borders, over 50%, are in $100 bills.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about, of the $1.2 trillion in circulation, more than half in value are hundreds. But we typically, we produce about $1.5 billion a year in hundreds.
And of your overall production, you mentioned the fact
around 7.
Exactly. And of your overall production, you mentioned the fact that by law you could not or were not authorized to change the design on the $1 bill. What percentage of your average annual run, in round numbers, are ones?
We do about $1 billion as well.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Peterson, since we've not for a number of years had orders from the Fed for circulating 50-cent pieces, for a moment, what percentage of, in round numbers, of your overall coin production are 1-cent pieces and 5-cent pieces? Those two lower denominations on the...
In 2013, we manufactured 10.7 billion coins, 6.6 billion of those, so about 65% were pennies, and then 1.1 billion nickels, so very concentrated towards the pennies and nickels.
So in both cases, at engraving and printing and at the Mint, a substantial portion of your production are the lower denomination, whether it's $1 bills in paper or a currency, or the 1 and 5-cent pieces in coin.
Correct.
Okay. By the way, on a slightly different note, Mr. Peterson, one of your predecessors began the process of an inventory of the various things within the Mint's possessions. And while your institution is not quite as old as Mr. Mills's institution, which predates you by a number of hundreds of years, nonetheless, you're one of the oldest institutions of the federal government. And not only the good work you do on a day-to-day basis in the numismatic programs, but the historic property and the historic record is always of great interest to the numismatic community. I don't know whether you can answer the question today or not, but I would ask if you're aware of that effort to create that master inventory of all your assets, some of us would define as treasures, and if you're not up to where at a particular moment, I would appreciate a response in writing later about just what the status of that treasure catalog is, as some people would describe.
Absolutely. The Mint is one of the oldest institutions in the United States, 220 years old, 222 years old, a venerable institution, and we do have many heritage assets at each one of our facilities. After the prior testimony, we hired a curator, and we have cataloged our heritage assets, and we're ready to share that information.
That's a very important thing, because that is of great interest to a good many good people around the country and around the world. And as you describe them, heritage assets, some of them literally go back to the very beginning. That said, I would just note to my friends at Engraving and Printing and at the Mint, if we continue on the monetary policies we have with a regimented inflation factor built in, at some point we have to assess the viability of those lower denominations. We don't make half-cent coins anymore, as the Mint did for 60-some years. I believe the original statute actually allowed for a denomination referred to as mills, 1/1000th of a dollar. We've never used that. At some point, we may have to assess in a practical way what we make and why we make it and how that impacts commerce. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And now we will go to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney, recognized for 5 minutes.
Sure. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to continue there on what Mr. Lucas was talking about, because we hear a lot of discussion about getting rid of the lower denomination coins. We've done that in the past. And I just wonder if commerce isn't changing to where smaller denominations are actually going to become more and more relevant as we go through. And I think immediately of online transactions. I'm not willing to pay 99 cents to buy a song, but I might pay 1/20th of a penny to listen to it one time. Is there a way for currency to do that? Is there a way for hard currency to deal in smaller and smaller denominations? Let's ignore, for example, for the instant, the larger and larger denominations, but start talking about smaller and smaller. Is there a way to do that with hard currency? Mr. Peterson?
As I mentioned in my opening statement, many transactions still occur in cash around the country. Cash enjoys the advantage. It's one of the lowest cost ways to conduct a transaction, and it's confidential. And so American public will probably want to continue to use cash for some percentage of their transactions. And our job at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing at the Mint is to facilitate commerce with the trusted coins and currency. And we know that millions of transactions happen every single day using cash, and it will continue to be like that.
Okay. I'm not sure if that answers the question about smaller denominations. Let me ask then. Let me talk to you what the reason I asked the question is. I'd be curious to know your thoughts on the cryptocurrencies, on Bitcoin specifically, some of the other currencies that are out there. I'm sitting here reading a blog, I guess, Mr. Peterson, from your former boss, Edmund Moy, who just recently wrote something on Bitcoin, and he closed the article by saying that Bitcoin and the ideas behind it will be a disruptor to the traditional notions of currency, but in the end, currency will be better for it. Have y'all given any thought, and I'll throw this open to the group, as to where your various organizations and institutions are on the role that online currencies, that cryptocurrencies play in this particular role, in the functioning of commerce? Then, Mr. Mills, I'll be curious to know what the Europeans think about it as well. But, Mr. Felix, you look like you...
I was going to say that's really a province for the Federal Reserve, the central bank, and they do tend to look at some of those things more than the operational organizations of the United States government.
All right. Well, but it would impact you directly, though, right? I mean, is it competition? Is it a complement? How do you has the BP taken a look at it? Do they have official position on it, or just they haven't done that yet? I'm just curious. I'm not trying to bait anybody. I know it's such a new topic that a lot of folks might not have a position on it yet. Printing and engraving does not. Does the Mint? No?
At the Mint, our focus is on producing United States coins, and the other alternative vehicles...
Doesn't factor in?
No.
Mr. Mills, has the British government taken a position on it to you?
Again, we at the Royal Mint act as agents for Her Majesty's Treasury. We don't set policy.
Okay.
So very much as Mr. Felix said, then that's not within my knowledge or my brief to answer, I'm afraid.
All right. Ms. St. James, I've asked everybody else. Maybe this is it seems apparently the wrong group to whom to ask this questions, but...
Well, they are correct in that it is a Federal Reserve here in the States, the Federal
Gotcha.
Reserve policy to make that decision. And they are looking at electronic payments and the increase in those electronic payments. Interestingly, the electronic payments have seemingly impacted checking more than the demand for currency.
Let me ask, Mr. Peterson, let me close with this. See if I can keep it germane to why y'all are here today. Is there a way, is it possible for traditional hard currencies to deal with transactions at a small fraction of a penny?
I'm sure in an electronic world there might be, but practically for the United States Mint to make coins that are less than a penny, I don't see that as part of our future.
And that would be the same for the British government, Mr. Mills, you think?
Again, not wishing to sound boring, then I'd have to defer to my colleagues in the Her Majesty's Treasury or the Bank of England.
Listen, I've been to a lot of meetings. This is by far not the most boring I've been to. I can assure you of that. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you. And just arriving, you're still okay. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Stivers. Perfect timing is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you holding this hearing on important issues. And I have a few questions related to coins. The first question is for Director Peterson. Can you assure us that the Treasury has not and will not make changes to our circulating coins that would increase the cost to produce them?
Congressman, Congress controls what the composition of our coins is, what the diameter is, what the weight is, and so we will continue to make the coins that are authorized for us to make today, the penny, nickel, dime, quarter, half, and dollar coin.
Great. And can you update us so you maybe can refresh my memory? As I recall, 2.5, 3 years ago, Congress mandated the U.S. Mint to do a study on what was in coins, how coins were produced. You produced an initial report on or about the deadline of 2013, end of 2013, as I recall.
It's December of 2012, yes.
December 2012, I'm sorry. And you said you needed more time, and then I saw another report, and I met with you subsequently, and I know you say you need a little more time. Can you update us on the status of those efforts?
Absolutely. I've mentioned before that we are analyzing multiple formulations of zinc and steel. Both appear to yield at this point in time cost savings, and we are putting the finishing touches on what those cost savings would be so that we can provide the right information in our next report to Congress, which will be in December of this year.
So we'll be a full 2 years after the initial required time frame for Congress, and will we have any final results by then, when we're 2 years late?
Yes, that's our next report is in December, and we will fully flush out all the various costs to produce both the zinc and the steel coins. We're also beginning to look at a stainless steel alternative and other alternatives that are various ratios of copper, zinc, and nickel.
Sure, thank you. And are you familiar with the Navigant study from 2 years ago? It said that the U.S. could save over $2 billion over a decade if just the nickel, dime, and quarter were made of plated steel, and you just referred to stainless steel. I just remind the entire audience that stainless steel costs almost 3 times what plated steel costs, and Canada made the switch to plated steel over 10 years ago. Do you guys at the Mint think the Navigant study was correct? And do you think there would be more savings if we included the penny to that, since it's our largest circulating denomination?
Our report 2 years ago showed that there were no alternative metals that would lower the cost of the penny. And so the penny is not part of that, and there would be no benefit to shift to steel. On the nickel, dime, and quarter, there are cost savings possible with steel coins, and I testified previously that obviously our friends in Great Britain use plated steel, our friends in Canada use plated steel. Steel is a viable option for United States coinage.
Thank you, and I appreciate you commenting on plated steel because your report as of 2012, when I looked at the price and we did some work and I've met with you since, it sure looked like you were using not plated steel, not cold rolled steel. It looked like you were using stainless steel price, and if you looked at the cold rolled steel price, you'd see a substantial savings on the penny, and I'd ask you to just go back and look at that. I want to ask you in a formal setting. I know I've asked you in my office, but I'd ask you again to go back and take a look at that again. So Canada and the United Kingdom and several other countries have already made the cost to lower cost coins over the last 20 years. In fact, the UK first and then Canada. Why has the United States been lagging in that, Mr. Peterson?
We were just given authority to go conduct research and development in December of 2010. We ramped up that effort in 2011, where we established a secure research and development laboratory in our mints in Philadelphia. We analyzed 27 different alternative compositions in 2011 and 12. We put out our first report in 2012 saying that there were a smaller number, 4 or 5, possible alternatives that we needed to go do further in-depth research on to confirm the actual costs of making the coins out of those materials. And that's what we're doing right now and what we'll report out on in December.
Thank you. And I would just urge you, and I have just a few seconds left, to move as fast as you can on that, because what we'll need to do if we're going to allow the vending coin industry time to put this in their capital replacement cost is make an announced change and then phase that in over time, because those folks deserve an opportunity to have it phased in. That's what Canada did. If we phase it in, it will work so much better because their capital replacement cost is an average of 100% replaced every 5 years. So the sooner we can announce the change and then continue to work toward it, the better it will be. And I think that industry would like to work with you, and they deserve the ability to have that phased in over a reasonable time frame.
Agree.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my non-existing time. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. And I think Mr. Clay and I have a couple more questions, so we'll do sort of a second round. There's only 2 of us to do in the round, and then we'll let you all go back to your to what you actually do all day. Okay, I'll yield myself 5 minutes. Let me get now to you, Mr. Felix, and understand. So we, Congress, have said you can't alter the dollar note?
That's correct. It was done, I think it was done when Mr. Colby chaired the Appropriations Committee, and there was language in there that says we cannot make any changes at all to the $1 note. And I think it's in part, this is when we were beginning our redesign of all notes, and it's in legislation that's continued on to this day.
But you would want to, I would presume that counterfeiting is less of a problem with a dollar. If you're going to counterfeit, make big money. So left to your own devices, you would like to change the dollar note?
We're perfectly comfortable because the counterfeiter didn't get that big return, if you will, on counterfeiting a 1.
Are there counterfeit dollar notes out, or have there been, or is it just kind of a...
You're talking about 1s? Yeah, just...
Yeah, on a 1, I'm sorry, yeah.
Very few.
Okay.
Very few.
And 5s, 10s? Because you're changing the 10, you said.
Right. Typically, the biggest issue with 5s actually is people would erase, they would take the 5 and bleach it out and print 100 on it. And the reason for that, they'll go to places that use the marker, and it'll give an indication of real currency because it's real currency paper. And that's one of the reasons why we made a preemptive change in the 5, and so we have in the watermark of the 5 the number 5 in it.
Okay, so this is a $100 bill, which is your latest iteration. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Of bill of any denomination, this is the latest iteration. So this is what you will be transitioning 20s, 50s, 10s to?
That represents the last of our what we call our next-gen series.
Yep.
As we begin to embark, we'll be starting with a 10, as I said in my testimony, and it'll be completely different. It may, in fact, have a higher order of technology in the banknotes. So that actually represents the closing of the next-gen series.
The next gen?
The end of that series, yeah.
The end of that series. So the 10 will be a new series.
That's correct.
From this one. Okay. So the dollar, single dollar, that you're not changing, does it cost less to make those than it costs to make these or the new 10 because it doesn't have all this anti-counterfeit stuff?
So it costs us typically about 4 cents to make a $1 note because it doesn't have those security features.
Right.
But we've just introduced a new technology enhancement at the BEP where we will yield even 15% more savings because we currently produce them in 32 notes per sheet, and we'll started this year. We're producing them in now 50 notes per sheet with an incredible yield, and so the price will go down below that even further.
Okay, but so it costs 4 cents to make that. What does it cost to make this?
It's about 12 cents.
Okay, a lot more. Yeah. Okay, gotcha. All right, thank you, Ms. St. James. You talked about that the Federal Reserve that it cost 67% more than it did a few years ago to do what?
Their cost to manage the coin inventory went up by 69% between 2008 and 2012.
So not to make it, we're talking about to manage the coin inventory.
To manage the coin
Why?
inventory.
What did they spend? Is there more or less physical money in circulation than there was then over that period?
Part of the problem is that they were monitoring a cost figure that included currency management costs plus coin management costs. They never took a separate look at what it cost to manage coins. But overall, currency, both note and coins, that cost increased by 23%. And when we took out the coin inventory cost, that's the 69% increase from 2008 to 2012.
Okay. This is something we'll have to look into some more. We did ask the Federal Reserve to be here. They declined, saying that there was an FOMC meeting within 2 weeks and that they couldn't show up because of an FOMC meeting in 2 weeks, although clearly what we're discussing has nothing to do with monetary policy in the broad sense of M1 and M2 and monetary policy, but they declined to be here for this hearing. There's a lot of questions I'd like to ask them on the basis of that. Thank you very much. My time has expired. I yield to the ranking member, Mr. Clay.
Thank
5
you,
minutes.
Chairman. Ms. St. James, the Federal Reserve's 2013 annual report found that reserve banks hold roughly 1.4 billion $1 coins, which accounts for more than 40 years of supply at current levels of demand. Given this, to what extent can the increase in coin management costs be attributed to managing dollar coin inventories associated with the dramatic increase in dollar coins as part of the presidential dollar coin program?
The cost increase that we referred to does not include the dollar coin. It only includes pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters.
How much do you anticipate the Federal Reserve will have to spend just to manage the dollar coin inventories over the next 40 years?
We don't have that cost at the moment.
Could you supply this committee with an estimate or the cost of
Yes.
what you think it would be?
Certainly.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson, can you discuss how you have been able to increase production efficiencies and bring down per unit costs of producing the penny and the nickel in recent years? Do you anticipate achieving further such efficiencies in future years?
Absolutely. I've testified before that our plant manager in Denver came to us from General Motors. Our plant manager in Philadelphia came to us from Ford Motor Company. I spent 11 years with General Electric. We know how to take costs out of our manufacturing operations, and the short answer is we don't swing for the fences. We try and hit singles every single day. And those little wins over time add up. And some of the things we've done, we've renegotiated contracts to get cost out year over year on some of our recurring contracts. We've invested in capital equipment that for the HVAC systems, the water treatment systems, the lighting systems, and they reduce our utility costs year over year. We shifted our manufacturing operations in Denver and Philadelphia to two-shift operations, and they run Monday through Thursday, and we turn down the furnaces on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday so that we can reduce our utility expenses. There's an inherent seasonality to coin demand, that in the build-up to Memorial Day, coin demand goes up in March, April, May, and then again in October and November before the holidays. And the coin flows back into the Federal Reserve in January and February and over the summer. And so what we've done is we smooth production. We look at what the 12-month forecast is, and we staff up for that level, and we make the same number every month. And if there's a peak, we would add temporary workers to make that peak demand. And so those kinds of cost reductions are what we're doing every single day, and we're going to continue to do that. And the cost reductions that I mentioned in my statement, a 42% reduction in G&A expenses over the last 3.5 years, that's one of our proudest accomplishments at the United States Mint.
Thank you so much for your response, Mr. Chairman. I have no other question. I yield back.
Thank you. And our final set of questions will be a second round from the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Stivers. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate that. My first question is for Ms. St. James. The GAO, we were just talking about, the ranking member was just talking about the costs with Mr. Peterson, Director Peterson, of how we produce coins. And I'd like to note that they have very expensive real estate in downtown Denver and Pennsylvania, the very old aging plants and aging equipment. And the way I understand it, Mr. Peterson just basically said they fire their furnaces for 4 days and then turn them way down for 3 days, and then they start over and do a 4-day week again the next week. Could we save money by modernizing our equipment, our plants, and our production techniques?
I think that's probably a question better asked, directed to the Mint.
All right, Mr. Director Peterson.
So, yes, our Denver Mint was built in 1904, our San Francisco Mint in 1937, and the West Point Mint in 1938, and our newest mint was Philadelphia in 1968. I did serve in the Navy, and I know we get to retire our aircraft carriers after 50 years. and so what we want to do in those facilities is look at our capital expenditures, look at what the buildings need, look at what equipment needs to go inside the buildings, and again, in the manufacturing cost reduction mode, is we want to preserve flexibility in the manufacturing operations so that we can move products from one site to another, back and forth. We don't know what the future will hold as to what materials we make our coins out of, and what denominations we'll be asked to make. And so preserving and expanding the manufacturing.
And all three of those facilities are in downtowns, aren't they? In pretty expensive real estate?
West Point is on the outskirts of the campus of the Military Academy on the Hudson River.
If you were able to sell the real estate and recoup the profits to build newer facilities in places that might be a little less expensive real estate and buy more modern equipment, I guess my question is, have you done an analysis of that in any of your plants? Because if your newest plant is 50 years old and your oldest plant is 106 years old.
110.
I'm sorry, 110 years old. I didn't want to short them. Have you done that analysis?
No, we have not done an analysis to go out and look at what the real estate markets are. I will say that these sites are heritage assets that Mr. Lucas asked about earlier in the hearing, that they're on the register of historic places in the cities in which they exist.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're very historic and beautiful, but in the end, we have an obligation to taxpayers to make our coins as efficiently as we can, too. My next question is for Mr. Mills. Having gone through the process of taking a lot of cost out of your coins and now being a mint that makes coins for how many nations?
In total, we say we supply around 60 other nations, depending on the year.
So you've been able to make coins for 60 other nations and continue to do research and development, buy new equipment because you have the flow through. Of course, the United States today, I think, only makes coins for one country. Tell me about your experience of how you've been able to take so much cost out of your coins.
Yes, thank you, sir. As I said in my testimony, I guess it's on some fundamental areas. So one has been changing the metal composition, and by and large, that's been changing from solid alloys, which are obviously relatively expensive. If you look at the price of the nickel at the moment, it's trading, I checked this morning, at about $18,000 a ton, versus steel in Europe is trading at about $900 a ton. So with a nickel-plated coin, you're talking about taking over 95%.
And do you buy your steel at $900 a ton?
That's the sort of price in Europe at the moment.
So the study in 2012 that the U.S. Mint did claimed steel was $2,100 a ton. Clearly, that's not the same composition steel that you buy.
I don't know I don't know anything about the specification of steel.
Cold rolled steel was trading at $900 a ton at that point too, so it's been pretty flat. And I don't mean to cut you off, but I only have 27 seconds left. If the United States were to enter into an agreement with the Royal Mint and ask you to make the penny for us, do you have any idea what you could make it for?
looking at the work we've done, I think it would be very difficult to have a US 1 penny that would be in positive seigniorage.
But could you make it for less than 2 cents?
I'd have to look at it more closely.
Okay.
I think it's a tough job.
Thank you. My time has expired again.
All right.
Keeps happening to me.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Stivers. I have to say, I do miss the halfpenny and the shilling. Of course, my taxes aren't paying for them. So, I'd like to thank our witnesses for their testimony today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses, whom I ask to please respond promptly if you get such questions. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. And with that, thank you all. This hearing is adjourned.